And now you have AI involved as well, which is even worse. I mean, it's just hopefully hopefully that won't happen the way it looks like it's going to happen. But I guess
Well,
I don't know.
I for one would kill to hear a new Ronstadt record, just one. I would just love to hear Ronstadt singing anything new. I mean, I don't want to hear a new Tom Petty song, but if they're past, I don't want to hear something new. But you take somebody like Ronstadt that can't sing. If it was just one song, I think it'd be really cool, But I don't want to see it become the model,
Right. Yeah.
The because then I mean, we had Pro Tool up the yin yang in the '90s, and you can hear it in the records. But if you go back and listen to "Don't Close Your Eyes," uh, you can hear Keith Whitley pitchy in there, and you can. The reason that's there is one, they didn't have Pro Tools, and two, they weren't able to fix it because Keith was gone.
Mm.
But there's some pitch issues in there, which is awesome. My ears have gotten so good that I listen to old rock and roll now and go, that guitar's out of tune, And it's nice though that it's there. I like the lack of perfection, if you will.
Yeah, the character. That's what we talked to Jerry Phillips recently, son of Sam Phillips, and that's what he was talking
Yeah.
about. Just having those little character. He called it character rather than mistakes.
Oh, it is. I mean, old time rock and roll. That's the demo.
Yep.
You know, funny story about old time rock and roll. One of the writers was writing for Rick Hall, and Rick let him go because he was a drunk and wasn't turning in songs. But Barry Beckett, who was one of the Swampers, piano player, and had a publishing company, he believed in this writer, and he said, "Look, I'll give you a writer's deal, but I'm only going to pay you when you turn in your songs, and the songs I approve, I'll give you money." One of the guys was living in Memphis, and he couldn't drive because he'd lost his driver's license. So he told his roommate or friend that if you drive me to Muscle Shoals, whatever we write this weekend, I'll put your name on the song. And one of those songs was Old Time Rock and Roll.
Nice. So you've
And
also
Seeger couldn't
go ahead.
beat the demo. And Seeger couldn't beat the demo, so they used the demo.
Well, hey, that happens a lot too. I've heard so many demo type stories, or
Yeah.
they'll perform in the studio for hours and hours and hours, and then they'll end up taking like the third take or something after like 60 takes. Um, just keeping all. Elvis was apparently notorious for that. He would sing the same thing over and over again, and then he would pick out the take he wanted just off the top of his head. Like, I want take 7. That was the best one. Um,
I have a copy of Elvis on from the board singing Suspicious Minds and learning it and making mistakes and stuff. But even though they screwed up on the band and he screwed up on lyrics once in a while, his pitch was absolutely perfect. Every note. Amazing.
yeah, it truly is. So you've also written a book, and it's called Honky Tonk Angels: Stories of God's Influence on Nashville's Most Iconic Songs. I'd love to hear where you got the idea for the book, and maybe tell us a little bit about it, other than what's in the title.
Um, Two things. The stories that I would see were amazing. The first story that came to me was I wrote for a company called Screen Gems that would become EMI, and I was hanging out with a guy named Greg Karp, and he wrote for Kiss out in LA. But he was working with a girl named Faith Hill, and he wanted me to have Faith sing some demos for me. So we were hanging out at the front office of Screen Gems when a guy named Michael Bonagera came in, and Michael was in a brand new group called Bailey and the Boys. And they'd had some success, and Michael Bonagera walked in and said, "Are you Craig?" And Craig Karp said, "Yes." So they went upstairs and wrote a song called "No Stop in Your Heart" that would go on to be a #1 for Marie Osmond, right? And Bonagera's from Pennsylvania. So at the end of the writing session, Michael Bonagera asked Craig Karp, who's from San Francisco, what part of Pennsylvania you're from. And Craig Karp said, "I'm not from Pennsylvania, I'm from San Francisco." And he said, "Oh, I'd heard you were from Pennsylvania." And he said, "You know who's from Pennsylvania is Craig Bickhart." And Bonagera says, "You're not Craig Bickhart?" He said, "No." He thought he was writing with Craig Bickhart, and Craig Karp just happened to be standing there, and his first name was Craig.
That's amazing. So is that where the idea for the book came from? Just that first story?
And that idea actually never got in the book, but there were so many amazing stories. And so I started putting the book together, and Rick Hall was, again, influential in getting me with the publisher that picked up the book. Um, but being a Christian, I really was really paying attention to the miracles that Jesus would do. He'd always give thanks before the miracle, not for what he thought was going to happen, but in his belief system, what had already taken place. And I present that in the book, but it's mostly the synergy. It's just unbelievable things had to happen for the songs to happen, not just to be written, but to get recorded and then to go on to be a hit. People don't know that, on the other hand, Randy Travis died at 52. And 3 singles later, they were out of singles and they had to re-release On the Other Hand, which never happens.
Mm-hmm.
Stories like that, just crazy.
Yeah, and I've been very blessed to interview a lot of really, really, really good songwriters, and I hear that synergy all the time, and things having to line up or running into somebody you haven't seen in years and end up with a hit with them. It's just all kinds of really magical things happen in the world of songwriting, and it's just really interesting stuff. So again, we're talking with Bernie Nelson, and Bernie, you're again very well known for the '80s, '90s style of country music, but now you're also making some of the best Texas music around. You mentioned 7 number ones, plus a slew of your own singles as well. Can you talk about some of the things that make both of these styles of music great, and maybe some of the differences between them from the standpoint of writing? Like, is there a difference in writing for '80s, '90s country versus Texas country?
I would say there is a little bit, because I'm still trying to write that turnpike type of song. I mean, I love that feel and that old Medicine Crow. I love that feel, and I try to dig into that a little bit more and try to create stuff in that vein, because I was a big fan of the band back in the day and all that type of feel, the dirt band, the band, the rawness of it, if you will, versus a formatted '90s type of song. But the songs that I've had number ones with Case Harden and Kinfo and Kyle Park, um, they were just songs that I was just delighted that they wanted them. And I brought Kinfo to Texas, and they'd recorded probably 6 of my songs before they came to Texas, and then a few more after that. And they just have exploded. And I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of songs on their records. And Kyle Park and I've been writing a lot and had a number one. And a young kid named Case Hart. I've had 3 number ones now with Case. And it's just doing your homework. It's like anybody else. I mean, I'll go listen to their album and see what they're missing and try to get an idea what's missing and what direction they might want to go. I think I have a single coming out of Matt Castile this coming year, and a bunch of other new artists that are bringing songs of mine out next year to Texas radio.
And yeah, so we've had Case on the show. Kinfo will be on the show in a couple of weeks, not too long after you. I think we're recording with them on October 9th. Kyle Park, never had the pleasure. Matt Castillo's been on the show, so I know all of these artists. It's nice to know that they're cutting your music. I did not know that. I know the first time we talked to Case was his first number one. I had no idea that was your song, so that's pretty cool to know.
Well, his first number one was Alcohol Abuse, and I pitched it to him, and Billy Yates wrote that. Billy Yates wrote Rockin' Chair and Choices. But I heard him do it at a songwriter festival, and I just said, I got to have a copy of that. And I pitched it to Case, and he just loved it. And I said, dude, if you can get all those words in without taking a breath, you go for it. And he did, and that was his first number one. Then and I had number ones with Honky Tonk Highway and When You Roll That Way, and recently with Just Drive. So, but I pitched him Stoned and I think one other song, but he's just such a great kid. Now, I love artists who don't really want to be songwriters like Rico, and they just let me pitch them songs, and I just try to find what they don't have already, and that goes all the way up to Kenny Chesney and Cody Johnson, and I try to fill that hole that they're looking for, you know.
If we have a little more time, I'd love to talk about your current album, which is called Stockyard Cadillac. It's also kind of reminiscent of that '90s vibe, I feel. So I'd love to hear from a studio standpoint. How vocal are you in the process of getting your layers and in your instrumentation and stuff like that into the final product of your records?
I have such a great band, and I track in Nashville, and my musicians are Hall of Famers. I mean, they played with George Jones and Marshall Tucker and Waylon Jennings, and they are amazing. And I try to stay out of their way. Stockyard Cadillac, I knew it was going to be Texas swing, and I was blessed to have Joe Spivey in the studio that day. Spivey played fiddle, wind, and he's part of the Time Jumpers, of course. So he arranged, how that one went down. But every once in a while, I'll think, instead of a dobro, let's go to slide. Instead of a acoustic, let's go to gut string. Let's overdub the B3. On this particular album, I don't think we had any strings at all. But it's just I try to give my input if I'm locked into something. A lot of times, like my guitar player, Mike Durham, I'll say, man, I really think we need a baritone guitar there. And he'll go, oh, I was thinking, and he'll play something just blow me out of the water. I'm like, okay, so I'll just shut up and sit back here. The trick as a producer for me is to not miss anything, because it always sounds great, but it's like getting that bicycle at Christmas, and it's just incredible until you realize it's not a 10 speed and it doesn't have brakes, and you missed it. So you don't miss anything, because once you're in there, it's kind of hard to get back in there and fix something if the tempo is off, or if the feel just in the end just wasn't right. And I've had a few songs go on records, and in hindsight, I'm like, gosh, we could have done a better version of that. But for the most part, this whole album is amazing. There's a song in there called "If Hemingway Had a Guitar."
It's my favorite one on the record, by the way. I love that song.
Unbelievable track, and the other part about this song is after 12 years, I'm finally closing out a thing called Weekend at Bernie's, where I write with people for the weekend, and they pay to come out here and write. And this album is every song on that record was written at a Weekend at Bernie's, and a lot of them were Stockyard Cadillac. I think there's 5 on there from a veteran, and he brought up Stockyard Cadillac, and he really wanted to talk about the dance halls in Texas and worrying if they would survive, like Music Row went away. So that's where Texas dance halls came from. And of course, he brought out Hemingway's guitar, but there's just some really special songs on this record. I just love it. Texas Cadillac is on there, and but the funny thing was, with Stockyard Cadillac, it got picked up by the Stockyard. It's their theme song for all their ads for the next 3-4 years. So
that's always a plus. Yeah, I love If Hemingway Had a Guitar. It's just such a great storytelling song, and that's for me. That's kind of my go-to. I love to hear a story in a song, and it's just man. And that's one of those what if songs, right? Like what if, and so I just love kind of immersing myself into the dream of the song, so to speak.
I've made my bread and butter on story songs and songs that make you feel. I mean, 30 years later, Daddy Never Was a Cadillac Kind. I still have 20-year-old kids come up and tell me it's one of their favorite songs they get to play out, and now recently the song that Winona recorded is back out there. It's Never Easy to Say Goodbye, and after her mom passed, it's a big part of her show, and it's just cool. And I do shows in Nashville, and I'll say, here's a song Chris LeDoux recorded, and you could hear a pin drop. Or I'll say, here's a song Conway Twitty recorded, and you could hear a pin drop before we play it. And it's just they're very, very appreciative of I guess what you call old school people like me. So